Without further ado, I would like to invite the first speaker from the proposition.
We are all here today due to globalization, debating together, forming friendships, and not only enhancing our personal skill set, but also the ones around us. So how could anyone ever say that globalization is anything but good? Good morning, honourable chairpeople, judges, esteemed guests and fellow debaters. The motion for today's topic is that globalization is a force for good, and we, the proposition, will be arguing that it is indeed a force for good. And not only that, but it also enhances and creates a culture of tolerance and acceptance in the future generations. We define globalization as a process by which businesses start operating on a global scale, and a force for good as a means by which a net positive outcome is achieved. I will now outline the structure of our team. As first speaker, I will be talking about the undeniably massive economic benefits of globalization. Our team's second speaker will be talking about the political relationships and and transnational fortifications and the benefits of tourism.
Yes, countries like France, England, and the US allowing other countries like Brazil, the BRICS, like Brazil and China, to globalize after realizing the detrimental effects. So, do you think it's still a force for good after this?
I do believe globalization is indeed a force for good, and just because of the few examples you've picked out, it doesn't generalize the whole culture of globalization. Going back to the structure of our team, our third speaker will be talking about globalization breeding multiculturalism and a global culture of acceptance and tolerance. Accepted.
Do you think polluting our planet is a force of good?
I don't think polluting our planet is a force of good. No, but not globalization doesn't necessarily encompass all of pollution towards our planet. And our concluder will rebut the opposition, summarize our team's points, and prove both logically and morally that we are correct. I will now be moving on to my own point. I would like to ask you to envision yourself as an unqualified, uneducated, and unemployed person in a country in an underdeveloped country of your choice. You've been searching desperately for a job, but no one wants to take you due to your lack of qualifications. And now imagine suddenly there are thousands of jobs which have opened up. Suddenly you're able to feed your 4 starving children. Suddenly you're able to fix the problems with your house. This is due to globalization. The opposition will be quick to mention that apparently globalization takes the workers unawares and exploits them and puts them into deplorable positions, but this is wholly untrue. Globalization enforces and builds a culture and enforces the working culture of a country. Millions of jobs are created, not only contributing to the country's global gross domestic product, but also the country of where the businesses came from. How could we ever say that this is not good? Accepted?
Are you denying the fact that these sweatshops that globalization occurs are not inhumane and disgusting conditions in which people die from?
We're not supporting the use of sweatshop, but we think you're rather generalizing how globalization works and choosing particular points to prove your argument rather than seeing the benefits that it provides as a whole. Once again, the opposition will be keen to mention that globalization takes away jobs from native businesses, but how can we say that competition between businesses is ever detrimental? Let me explain. Competition breeds innovation, and competition is vital in the improvement of products and services. When there is a higher rate of competition, businesses are pushed to improve in order to stay in the market, which leads to the quality of their products and services being ever on the rise. And this is one of the massive, impossible to ignore benefits of globalization. So I take you back to the question I asked you at the beginning. How can we ever say that globalization is anything but good? Thank you.
4 minutes, 31 seconds.
would now like to invite the first speaker from the opposition.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the proposition, judges and chair. This House does not believe that globalization is a force for good. The resulting increase in trade that comes from globalization causes the exploitation of workers, depletes the Earth's limited resources, and severely damages the environment. How can this possibly be seen as a force for good by the proposition? Now, the definition of globalization is the following. It is the process by which businesses start operating on a global scale. And the definition for good is behavior that is right or acceptable. And I would like now to rebut some of the points made by the proposition. First speaker. Now, she asked, how can globalization be a bad thing? Furthermore, that claiming that it has a net positive outcome. Now, I'll explain it to you in economic terms. Globalization brings an increase in demand for international goods, which causes pollution. Due to transport and production of the goods that are in demand. Well, how can globalization be a bad thing? It is damaging our environment. That answers your question. Furthermore, they don't stand by sweatshops, and they also claim that how can competition be a negative thing? No, thank you. She stated that businesses are pushed to reduce costs, and that is exactly what they're being. They're being pushed. So what do? They go to less economically developed countries, such as Africa, and they get cheap labor from there, exploiting the workers. Now, as I've stated previously, my team and I believe globalization is a force for good because its disadvantages totally eclipse the limited benefits that it brings about. Yes, thank you.
Could the speaker clarify how globalization going into countries like the one you gave, Africa, is exploiting the workers?
Well, as already explained, when companies such as Primark go to Africa, they go there because of the cheap labor that's available and the low regulations that there are. For example, in Africa, we don't have the legal working age is not 18, it's actually 12. So they can actually employ kids, and therefore that's how they're exploiting them. Now, exploitation of workers, destruction of our own planet, and the eradication of culture. These are concepts you might be familiar with, and they have one thing in common. All of these problems, which are right now threatening to eliminate humanity, are all caused by globalization. Picture this: thousands of 10-year-olds in Africa working 13 hours a day in a vile steel factory. Ladies and gentlemen, these people, these kids, are working and living in inhumane conditions. And they're also losing their childhood because of globalization. Yes, please?
Is the speaker suggesting that providing a family with the means to live is really a negative thing?
No, I haven't said that. All I'm saying is that globalization, although it has some benefits, it is much like the disadvantages are much worse because you're literally exploiting the child population, which I think is pretty negative. It is an unfair world that we live in, ladies and gentlemen. Companies such as Primark do not employ labour in UK, for example, anymore. They go out and they go outside the European Union, for example, to Africa, and they go because of the cheap labour that's available. As she said, they're being pushed to do this, and this is globalization, this is competition. They are pushed to find the lower cost possible so they can make profits, and this is what globalization does. They exploit labour and utilize people as animals for production, all because of globalization. And it is not only labour. We're driving our planet to the verge of collapse. We're relentlessly using up the Earth's scarce resources and destroying our home. And the worst thing is that we know it, and we still won't do anything about it. Like the proposition, we're in favour of the root of this evil, which is globalization. Now, our second speaker will further elaborate how globalization is the main cause of pollution and the destruction of our planet. The rise in demand for international goods will inevitably harm the environment. Also, our third speaker will explain how, with examples, how TNCs, which are transnational companies, are acting unethically and being allowed to essentially commit crimes because of globalization. Finally, our fourth speaker will summarize our points and will conclude this debate. Ladies and gentlemen, how can globalization be a force for good when it's destroying our planet, our culture, and ultimately our home. Thank you.
4 minutes, 54 seconds. I would now like to invite the second speaker from the proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, today this House believes that globalization is a force for good. And over the course of the next minutes, we will prove without question that this is in fact the case. But before I get on to introducing some of my points to express and emphasize precisely why this is, I'd like to point out some flaws in the opposition's argument. Firstly, the first speaker seemed to continuously assume that all businesses are factories that use up lots of resources to produce products and pollute extensively, and that they're essentially all sweatshops. But I'd like to point out that the expansion of businesses does not always mean massive factories and production of products of things like clothes. Whilst we're not neglecting that is often the case, we can't forget that lots of companies that expand into foreign nations provide societal services such as insurance and banking, which is very important to not only the local economies, but the global economy as a whole. And secondly, thank you guys, thanks. Right. And then the second thing that I'd like to point out is that the employment of children is not an inherently bad thing, as I understood from the first speaker. I myself has worked as a person who delivers post for people at the age of 12, and I did not see that as a problem. In fact, that was a very productive job that allowed me to earn some pocket money for myself. And whilst that's not always the case for people working in less economically developed countries, we can't neglect that. Yes, please.
Can you provide an example of a TNC that uses these ethical, sustainable factories and not the ones that we have described?
Well, I'm not actually saying that all factories are particularly sustainable or that they have absolutely no polluting effect on the environment. What I'm pointing out is that simply that a very significant portion of the businesses that are expanding globally are simply providing services, which are on practically all levels not polluting almost at all, because many of them are digital. And as I was finishing up my point about children working, we can't forget that in some families, especially when wages are relatively low, it is important to have as many members as working as possible, particularly when it is hard to afford an education. Put yourself in the shoes of such family. Is it not important to allow those children to help their parents sustain themselves and provide a better future for the next generation? I think that is without question the case. No, thank you. Thanks. Right, now I'd like to move on to my first point, and that is about the very vital prospect of political relationships. Globalization allows and builds a platform basis for alliances around the world, economic or otherwise. Yes, sir.
Do you believe 12-year-olds should be stripped from their childhood to promote the economy?
I don't believe so, but if their families are unable to provide them with an education and they're truly struggling, and I believe it is a fantastic opportunity for them to be able to work to help sustain the family. So no, I don't think it is inherently a problem. As I continue, as a massive TNC expands into a less economically developed country, investors are more inclined, global investors from around the world are more inclined to invest in that country to expand businesses, properties, and even infrastructure. And this growth not only allows for accessibility to various goods, but improves the global political situation amongst more economically developed and less economically developed countries. This maintenance of good relations is due to the fact that nobody wants a destabilized economy because of their massive companies not getting along with their other ends in less economically developed countries. We also can't forget that overall this results in a higher stability of the political situation around the planet and even a net safer environment for humanity. Amongst other things, it also provides a platform for discussion of vital global issues and allows countries to solve them in combined power, even things like global warming, to which the first speaker alluded. Now, I'd quickly like to also mention tourism. What does all this improvement cause? Well, LEDCs, less economically developed countries building up through tourism, not only allows the international community to experience things on the wider horizon, but even allows these less rich countries to build up new industries of their own that are controlled by themselves. Namely, one of the most obvious is tourism, which obviously, as the country grows, will require new accommodation, places for food, and even entertainment. And this subsequently raises awareness about these nations, and it can be argued that this would cause people to take notice and give more relief and aid in cases of things like natural disasters. So, are we really saying that a process that makes the world a safer, wealthier place could be a force of bad on the whole? I think not, and I thank you for listening.
Five minutes and 3 seconds.
I'd now like to invite the second speaker from the opposition.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, judges, chair, and members of the proposition. This House does not believe globalization is a force for good. Our planet is dying. We need to stop this foolish attitude and realize globalization is not good. I would like to begin by rebutting some of the points made by the proposition. Their first speaker stated that globalization creates thousands of jobs. However, these jobs are sometimes inhumane, as workers are forced to work ridiculous hours in horrible conditions while earning pennies. Could you please explain to me how this is a good thing? If you look at it from a financial point of view, it may be good, but the negative effects on culture, freedom, and our planet outweigh any economic benefits it may have. Globalization simply exploits poor people and our planet. Is the proposition supporting the destruction of our planet? Their second speaker stated companies use sustainable methods, no thank you, of globalization. However, cannot provide a single example regarding that point. Therefore, we must disregard that argument. Globalization relies on transportation. Yes, please.
Is the speaker aware that child labour is prevalent all throughout history and is not a direct fault of globalization?
I'm not saying that it hasn't been occurring throughout history. However, globalization is exploiting it directly, and therefore it is not a force of good. The amount of trucks, ships, and planes that are being used on the daily is increasing at a tremendous rate. Globalization leads to a net welfare loss, as the cost of polluting outweighs the economic benefit. Why are we doing this to ourselves? When we clearly know that the disadvantages outweigh the benefits. We need to make a sustainable change. We have made very few electric cars. However, we are so far from creating non-polluting planes and boats that by the time we do it, the effects will be irreversible if they are not already. No thank you. As my fourth speaker stated in a POI, the BRICS, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, some of the biggest polluters in the world. These countries want to globalize even more. However, huge polluters such as the UK, US, and France have realized that this cannot carry on. They have committed great mistakes as they have been contributing to the death of our planet. The oil spills, the CO2 emissions have been increasing at a devastating rate. It is clearly linked to the increase in globalization. No, thank you. The harm it does to us alone proves that it is not a force of good. Our trees are burning. Our animals are dying. Our ecosystem is on the verge of collapsing. Globalization is a force that is polluting our planet. We cannot continue this selfish behavior. No, thank you. We need to put a stop to this rapid globalization. We need to realize our planet is more important than economic growth. As I explained before, the BRICS superpowers polluting our waters. They are polluting our waters so much that the local seas are becoming packed with plastic and waste. We need to stop. Not tomorrow, not next week, right now. Yes, please.
Is the speaker aware that many of these countries before globalization used to use only non-renewable energy sources, but due to globalization have started to use more renewable sources?
They may be slightly using some renewable resources. However, China, India are the biggest polluters in the world, and they are not making a difference. And therefore, globalization is not helping us in any way, shape, or form. As I was stating, We need to cut down our CO2 emissions, reduce transportation, and realise our planet is beautiful, and we do not have a replacement. Globalisation will lead to its own demise. It is destined to fail. According to BBC News, 37% of animals will go extinct due to our consumerism. Our children will grow up in a completely different planet if we do not begin to clean up our mess. They will not be able to see the gorgeous coral reefs or even something as simple as a bee. Let that sink in, ladies and gentlemen. They may grow up in a barren wasteland, all because we wanted to make more money. Our planet does not have a financial value. We are abusing the resources we have been blessed with. Furthermore, the transnational corporations also have many disadvantages, as they are mass polluting. My third speaker will elaborate further on this point. We need to wake up and realise our planet is not an infinite mine and it will soon collapse on top of us. Ladies and gentlemen, how can globalisation be a force for good when it is destroying our people, our culture, and our homes? Thank you very much.
Five minutes and 1 second.
I would now like to invite the third speaker from the proposition.
The opposition will be keen to bring up that the process of globalization can destroy cultures. But I am here to tell you that this is simply not true. In fact, globalization is a force for multiculturalism. But before going further into this, I'd like to start with some rebuttals. My preceding speaker said that these people who are being exploited, supposedly, are working for pennies. But what they forgot to mention is that conversion rates are a huge factor in this ordeal. Although they might be working for pennies in a translated currency, in their local currencies, this could be enough to buy a meal for an entire family for multiple days. Also, they brought up the point of global warming. We are not denying that global warming is a huge issue in our modern world, but what we refuse to acknowledge is that this is wholly due to globalization. Because in a large majority of these countries, oil was used before globalization became as prevalent as it was today. But due to the effects of globalization, more renewable sources have been adapted, more effective ways of harnessing our Earth's resources accepted.
You say that you recognise that global warming is a massive issue. However, do you not agree that globalisation is feeding into this problem?
We agree that globalization does have effects on climate change, but we are not acknowledging that it's a force for bad because we think that it is still because we think that climate change is not solely the factor of globalization. To continue with my rebuttals, oil was used in a large majority of these countries, but due to globalization, renewable sources are being used. My previous speaker said that a lot of these countries like China and India are doing nothing, but that's simply not true. India has made a plan to start building over 200 thorium reactors for clean energy, and China is going to build 20,000 square miles of solar panels by 2025. And so many other countries are following these footsteps because due to the technology being shared through these countries, we know that certain things are better for the environment and worse for the environment because our globalization is sharing knowledge across countries. But now I'd like to move on to my own points. Firstly, it's about culture. Culture is not being destroyed by globalization because culture is not fixed, it is not stagnant, it's vibrant and dynamic, and that's maybe one of the best things about it. And we can see this all throughout history. Take, for example, almost every country in Europe. You can go walking through and you can see the prehistoric mounds to the medieval castles to the modern skyscrapers, and behind every one of these is a snapshot of the culture at the time. We can see a rainbow of cultural change. And we can see how this affects us to this day. Our language, our art, our clothing, and our food. Cultures cannot be good or bad because they're subjective, but they can always be open to change. And globalization is going to be a huge factor in multiculturalism and acceptance and a merging of lifestyles. Because when a business from another country comes to yours, you're exposed to that culture, at least in a part, and you learn more about it. So when we send people to other countries from ours, they come in with a positive attitude, being more knowledgeable travelers, knowing more about the countries they're going to. Accepted?
Do you know where some countries like the United States are imposing the culture in Europe, for example?
I do acknowledge that the US is globalizing quite fast and its culture is merging as well. But the thing is, culture isn't some sentient being that tries to just merge wherever it can or anything. The people there are accepting this culture because they find certain aspects of it intriguing. So they mix it with their own cultures, and that's how cultures are formed. So when you're wearing clothes that originate from another country, or eating food that tastes so good and that comes from another culture, you have a more positive attitude to that sort of place. How is that not a force for good? In an ever-joining world, it is more and more important that we send respectful citizens out to other countries to maintain good relations. Moving on to my next point. Technological advances cannot be understated due to globalization. Medicine, for example. Medicine has been spread all around the world from countries that have discovered it to other countries and saved so many countless lives. And also global warming, information about renewable resources, new ways of distribution that are more beneficial to the environment, and so many other things. Technological advances have been spread around the world that help engage our citizens with values that are core to their beliefs. It helps them develop as a country and makes the average life in that country more happy because the resources they have are more useful. And this is a direct impact of globalization. It spreads technology and it spreads knowledge around the world. How is that not a force for good? Thanks for listening.
5 minutes, 9 seconds. I'd now like to invite the third speaker from the opposition.
Ladies, gentlemen, members of the opposition, judges and chair, this House does not believe that globalisation is a force for good. Before I start with my own points, I'd like to start by rebutting some of the points made by the opposition. They claim that globalisation makes loads of jobs and work for people and this can help and enhance their lives. Oh, they seem to have an idealised view about what these jobs actually entail. Do they realise that underage, exploited, mistreated children are the ones working in these vile, damp and inhumane conditions to supply our consumerist gluttony? Do they seriously believe that they are treated equally, they are treated fairly, they're even treated humanely? Some people even argue that they are treated worse than animals, and yet they deny this is a force for bad. How can they state this? Furthermore, they say that these give you jobs to feed your 4 starving children. However, the fact of the matter is that your 4 starving children are probably already working in this sweatshop, dying every single day. Let's take the example. In the UK, a young lady actually bought a Christmas card, no thank you, from a well-known supermarket, and inside it was a letter from a young Chinese girl. She explained the horrors that she had endured in this sweatshop, the fact that she was starving, she had respiratory issues due to the dampness in the sweatshop, and she was suffering horrible conditions that no one, let alone a small child, should ever be exploited to. And yet they still deny that this is a force of bad. How can they? Furthermore, they conceded that globalisation has a direct impact on the planet and global warming. And my second speaker painted and illustrated the problem of global warming. If that doesn't wrench on your heartstrings, then I don't know what will, because this problem is not going away. And they deny that this is a force for bad. How can they? Yes, please.
Is the speaker aware that even without globalization, much of the same pollution would just be occurring in the countries of origin of those businesses?
No, because transport and factories are actually 2 of the biggest pollutants on the earth, and globalisation is actually feeding into this problem, creating more factories, more transportation. As my second speaker said, globalisation relies on transportation, and this is the biggest polluter in the world. Thank you. Furthermore, they say that the mixing of cultures is good, that we should be multicultural. And yes, I agree, we should be multicultural. But when the point where a culture is being inundated and westernised and being completely lost, this is not a force for good. For example, in the UK, the most popular dish is a curry. I'm English and I can say that I'm very disappointed that hundreds of years of my tradition and my culture has been lost to a different country that has come in and inundated my own culture. No, thank you. Furthermore, they actually conceded the fact that most of the world is being westernised, therefore countries are losing their identity. Do they not agree that in a world of such change, political change and drama, we should not have an identity and a culture that, no thank you, that anchors us to who we are? Furthermore, they say that countries can build up through tourism. However, let's look at the example of Marbella itself. Once a small traditional Spanish fishing village has now become a flashy town in which the original inhabitants can no longer afford to live in. Therefore, people are being driven out of their homes, out of their traditions, out of their cultures and losing their identities because of westernisation and the spreading of cultures. Yes, please?
Is the speaker suggesting that these cultures are being forced to adapt and not just adapting because they enjoy the other cultures?
I think, as I said, that we are being inundated. Globalisation is colonising our world with exploitation. We cannot escape it. If you go into England, down the street there'll be a curry shop, a pizza shop, a McDonald's. These are westernised dishes and westernised countries that are companies that are taking over our country. Therefore, we have no say in what we do and what we say. And now let's talk about the ethics more, about TNCs. These are spreading vastly. There are sweatshops all around. I'd like to look at the example of the Ramada sweatshop, which set on fire because of the overworking of machines and thus the overworking of its employers. Thousands of children, mothers, fathers, grandparents died in that fire. And why is that? Because they are being forced to overwork to keep up with the demands of consumerism and our gluttony. Is this a force for good? Can the proposition seriously suggest that this brings any positives to our society? How can globalisation be justified and even be described as a force for good when all it is doing is destroying our people, our cultures and our home? Thank you.
Four minutes and 32 seconds. I would now like to invite the reply speaker from the proposition. I would like to remind both teams that no POIs are allowed.
Good afternoon, honourable chairpeople, esteemed guests, fellow debaters, and judges. The motion for today's debate is this House believes that globalization is a force for good. We, the proposition, agree with this motion, and over the course of the debate, we have undoubtedly proven to you why we are 100% correct in this matter. But before I remind you why, I would like to correct and debunk some of the opposition's points. Let's start in chronological order. First speaker. The first speaker says that companies exploit the workers in the countries that they go to. And while we acknowledge that some workers are in not fantastic conditions, the very reason that people are taking these jobs is because they need them. The country that they are living them in is not providing them jobs. They need these jobs to live. If you want inhumane, it is inhumane to take away these jobs from them. They also stated that globalization is the only cause of global warming. However, if globalization wouldn't exist, the same pollution would be occurring elsewhere. Businesses would still be developing. Additionally, they generalized all businesses to sweatshops and completely ignored digital businesses and services. On to the second speaker. The second speaker again said it is inhumane to take and give children these jobs, as they work hard for only pennies. However, as our speakers pointed out, these pennies could mean the world to them. They need these pennies to provide for themselves, for their families. They need them to stay alive. Child labor has also been prevalent throughout history. Globalization is not, in any way, shape, or form, the cause of child labor, and we must take this into consideration. Additionally, they again blamed globalization for all climate change providing the same point as the first speaker. However, as my speakers pointed out, globalization can encourage using renewable energy. And they also said it is destroying our culture. However, they clearly completely ignored my third speaker's point, because my third speaker pointed out that culture in itself is fluid. I am standing here debating in front of you because my culture has changed. I am no longer a cave woman like I was millions of years ago. Culture advances. We are bettering ourselves, bettering the new generation. So who are we to say that culture should stay static, to stay the same throughout generations? On to the third speaker. The third speaker generalized again that all businesses work with child labor camps. However, as me and my speakers have repeatedly proven, this is in no way true. Again, they also said we are losing our culture. Same point as the second speaker. But again, this is simply not true. People are adapting by choice. We are not forced to do this. We are not forced to adapt and better ourselves. We are doing this by choice because we believe it will give us a better future. They also cherry-picked very specific examples of sweatshops. And while we completely acknowledge the existence of sweatshops, we also say that not every single business works with a sweatshop, and it would be completely ludicrous to generalize every single business. Now, I would like to talk about my team's points. Our first speaker, Anita, stated that globalization provides many necessary jobs for people that need them in order to stay alive in very dire situations. She also discussed how globalization fuels competition between businesses, leading to better quality of life as new products are introduced. Our second speaker, RIS, stated that globalization provides a platform for countries to discuss and solve political issues. He also talked about how tourism helps countries like less economically developed countries develop and thrive. Our third speaker, Karin, talked about how culture is dynamic and open to change. So globalization has no negative effects and is only helping us push forward. He also mentioned how if people really wanted to reject globalization, they would be able to. And he brought up how many technological advancements are spread around the world via globalization. And so now I ask you, is it not a force for good to better our world? Thank you.
5 minutes, 11 seconds. Finally, I would now like to invite the reply speaker from the opposition.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the proposition, judges and chair. Before I go on to summarise my team's points, I would like to rebut the highly refutable points brought up today by the proposition. To begin with, the first speaker did not respond to my POI regarding countries not allowing other countries to globalize because there is simply no answer to this. It proves it can't be possibly a force for good. She then went to say that firms do not exploit people in undeveloped countries. This is not true. She is simply ignoring the truth. Even the year sixes sitting in front of me are aware of the vast businesses exploiting people unfairly. Furthermore, the second speaker said that the most outrageous argument I have ever heard in a debate. He said that children being exploited is not that bad. And then he had the guts to compare these vile jobs of these children to his own part-time summer work of delivering newsletters. What he said is that 12, 10-year-olds, to put into context, the 12, 10-year-olds are sitting next to you, working in inhumane conditions, inhaling fumes which have resulted in these children dying at a young age due to cancer is fine, it's alright. They are working for 12 to 14 hours a day in these detrimental conditions and he compared it to his own 4-hour summer work. I think what is clear here is that the proposition are completely unaware of the true effects of globalization, and therefore defend it so vigorously. Please do not be fooled by their passionate, theatrical speeches, and pay close attention to the fact that they truly do not understand globalization. Ladies and gentlemen, throughout the whole debate, we have mentioned the multiple detrimental effects of globalization, which clearly outweigh its benefits. The simple fact that it destroys our planet is sufficient to prove that it's not a force for good. The transport on which globalization does not only rely, but completely depends on, pollutes so much it is killing complete ecosystems. Globalization requires boats and planes, which are the greatest pollutants. On top of this, the firms go to underdeveloped countries with no regulation and can pollute as much as they want. We are all well aware of the effects of climate change and pollution, the melting of the poles, the extinction of species, extreme weather conditions, and we all know where it leads to, the extinction of the human race. And still, the proposition are trying to defend it when it contributes hugely to our own death. Before killing us, it will destroy our culture, making our final years miserable. We can already see how the Western culture is overtaking all the other cultures. You simply have to travel to Africa or South America to see people wear Barcelona and Real Madrid shirts instead of their own traditional clothing. Thousands of years of culture and traditions are being crushed in a couple of years because of globalization. The people who are being stripped of their culture are also being exploited unfairly, and as they have no choice. They work for countless hours to get paid miserably yet again because of globalization. These underdeveloped countries cannot do anything about it. They can't do anything to stop it, as they are in so much need they can't reject any money they are offered. It's like asking a man who hasn't eaten in weeks to commit a crime for a loaf of bread. If he doesn't eat the bread, he will die. Therefore, he has no option. He has no choice. To conclude, there are so many negative effects that countries like France, England, and the US have realized and are not allowing the BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to globalize. How bad does globalization have to be for countries who have already done it to admit it has negative effects and not wanting other countries to do it at all? Countries who are well known for being the proudest of their own decisions, like the United States and the United Kingdom, have admitted they were wrong. They have admitted they've done a terrible mistake and are trying to stop other countries from committing the same mistakes. So, if we do a quick recount, we are eradicating Asian cultures, exploiting the weak, and destroying our planet, our home, to such an extent that countries that did it in the past are trying to stop it. How can it be a force for good when it's destroying our people, our culture, and our home? Thank you.
Minutes and 40 seconds. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes this debate.
If the judges could please hand me their score sheets when they're finished, and we will announce the winning team. Thank you.
Excuse me? The winner of this debate, it's a draw.